Hey everyone, this is the Mind Workshop podcast. I'm your host, Victor Dwyer, and this is the podcast where we just go through everyone's unique perspective on happiness and really think and figure out what it takes to be happy these days. Today we have Angie on, and we're going to go through a little bit about embracing your journey to freedom and happiness, and then we'll also go into really like why it's okay not to be happy all the time, where it's a normal cycle of life. Angie's going to give us a little intro about who she is and how she got here, and then we'll kind of dive into the conversation. Angie, thank you so much for joining today.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me. Thanks for reaching out.
No problem. Tell us a
So,
little bit about you.
yeah, I am Angie. I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. I am a certified integrative life coach. Prior to that, I worked in the nonprofit field my entire career leading up to starting my own thing and working for myself. So my whole career has been focused always on people. I love working with people and, helping them. The nonprofits that I worked in were all mentoring organizations or schools or working with families. And so people have always been my focus. And so from that, I was just exploring because working in the nonprofit sector, you really do not make much money. Love helping people, but there's not a lot of opportunity for, making money. So I was always exploring what could I do on the side. And so that's kind of what started my entrepreneurial journey. And it's evolved over time, my business. I started working with accountability and, holding people accountable to work towards their goals. And then from there, I've transitioned into, life coaching and really getting deeper into some of those underlying things that really hold us back from going for that life that we want. And so I just continue to evolve as I learn more. And I'm just kind of obsessed with all things, how the brain works, how, we can develop as humans and get to know ourselves better. And so that's where I landed. So in 2020 is when I stopped working in the nonprofit sector and have just been working on coaching. And I'm a mom of two. So it's kind of like entrepreneur and mom and all of that wrapped up into one is what I'm doing now. So
I love that. I love that.
yeah.
And I want to start out by really going into the stories that we tell ourselves, because I always think this part is so fascinating, because that's kind of why humans are so successful, is because the stories and the things that we tell ourselves, like the story of money, like a $1 bill. It literally is just a piece of paper. If you give that to a monkey and say, hey, for this $1 bill, this will give you a banana in the future, the monkey would go, you're crazy. Yeah, like, okay, human. And that's literally what he would say. But this is the story that we tell ourselves, that this $1 bill is going to give us some type of value in the future. So, and then we also go so deep into it, telling our own stories, like, hey, I'm Victor. I'm running a podcast. I'm a happy person. Like, these are the stories that I tell myself, and it's really fascinating. Can you go into a little bit about how someone can figure out the story that they're telling themselves and how to kind of pick that apart a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's like when you very first asked me when we first met, what is your definition of happiness? I mean, I think it is really starting to become aware of those stories
Mhm.
that we tell ourselves because it's hard. I mean, thinking back even to myself like 4 or 5 years ago, it's like I was walking around on day to day and I just didn't even realize what those stories were that were underneath the surface that I was telling myself and or holding myself back, right?
Mhm.
Um, so, I mean, I think for me, really getting to some of those stories that we tell ourselves and underlying beliefs and like raising the awareness is like really starting both to tune into like, what am I actually thinking? And what am I actually feeling? And it can like start from two directions of like getting in touch physically with what am I feeling on a day-to-day basis? Because from there, I can start to like tune into like, okay, I'm feeling a little bit anxious. What's going on here? What am I actually thinking or feeling? Like, what am I thinking or about that's causing that anxiety? And starting with the feeling and sort of tuning into that. It's so amazing to me how little people can do that. or have that skill of actually like tuning into their physical sensations to like figure out what is underneath them.
Mhm.
So I do that a lot with clients, like really starting to tune into that physical sensation on one end, and then otherwise it's like, oh, what story am I telling? What am I thinking that's actually causing this feeling? So
Mhm.
there's like two ways of looking at that
Mhm.
aspect. And one thing I really like to try to tell people that I've been using recently is getting to, like, if you can pinpoint a thought or something, to really get to some of the underlying story that we tell ourselves, is asking yourself, pausing and saying, like, why is that a problem? And like from there, answering that question, and why is that a problem? That's where we can kind of get to some of those like more unconscious stories that we're telling ourselves. Because there's always the
Mhm.
conscious level, and then there's like the unconscious that's like underneath that we don't really know. And that's like one way to bring that out. So for one example, a friend of mine recently was like, I really am interested in like coaching, but actually like everything's going really well for myself right now, but I feel like I shouldn't feel this good, or I don't know. And I'm just like, well, why is that a problem? Like what's underneath? Like even him feeling good, he was making some sort of problem about it. It's like, oh, well, there's always that underlying story that you
Mhm.
can bring out, like, well, why is that a problem? If
Yeah,
that makes
I love that. I love that. So it sounds like action items for the audience if they wanted to like really dive deep into their like what would you say would be the first three steps to really uncover what the story they are telling themselves really.
sense. Yeah. Man, it's like hard to kind of come up with.
Mm-hmm.
I think like it's first just noticing, like
Mm-hmm.
noticing the thoughts, and like trying to slow down and actually be like noticing the thoughts that you're telling yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think working with a coach is just so nice because you can actually just start talking, and then the coach can be like, oh, and pinpoint like those areas of like, oh, that's actually what you're telling yourself. um but
Mm-hmm.
I think just like tuning into noticing what the thoughts are, because then once you actually notice what the thoughts are, that's when you can start to question and turn them around.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it can just even be as easy as you know like writing down your thoughts. Yeah, it's like noticing
Mm-hmm.
what they are and then questioning them and turning them around. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like I think questioning everything. So like even like you said, like a piece of paper. Like what am I thinking about this
Mm-hmm.
dollar bill? Anything that you're working towards, if it's a goal that you have, you can try to think, okay, like what am I telling myself about this goal? What do I already believe about this goal I'm trying to achieve? And then once we get the thoughts, that's where we can question them and turn them around.
Yeah, and I think questioning why is so powerful as well because like a lot of our goals, if you really dived into like why, but the whys behind our goals, most of them came from society, either that or other people.
Yes,
It's like I always
100%.
tell the story a million times where I wanted to get a fit body and I would work out all the time saying I love working out, I love getting skinny, and it was like why? Like it was like why am I working out so much? And then it was like, oh, it's because I'm not comfortable with who I am. It's like thinking like, oh, once I have a perfect body, then someone will love me. Then I can love myself. And it was like the same thing over and over. And so if you really ask why behind your goals, then you can really start to find out like, oh, it's because it's an insecurity somewhere else down the line. And the brain is really good at tricking us into thinking that we're running towards something. In reality, we're running away from something because it doesn't want to think about it. And
Hmm.
it's really important to ask why to figure out what we're running away from because our brain's really good at hiding it. So that's where we have to really dig down and figure out what we're running away from.
Yeah. I mean, anytime that there's something that you find that you just don't want to do, for example, like, oh, I really, need to clean my room, but I just don't want to. It's like there's a feeling there that you are avoiding feeling. and that's like a really good like thing to notice if you really are like resisting something. It's like, oh, I know I really want to work out, but I just can't get myself to do it. There's something there that you're avoiding feeling, whether it's boredom or, something. It's like if you can tap in and ask yourself that question, what is it here that I'm avoiding feeling? Is it I'm avoiding feeling vulnerable? I'm avoiding feeling, whatever it is. It's a really good thing to notice that avoidance of procrastination. Because then it's like if you can figure out what you're avoiding, then you can solve for either just embracing that feeling and being like, okay, I know I can actually handle that vulnerability or like being scared or whatever it is. Then you can like show yourself that you can actually do that. Or if it's boredom, it's like, okay, how can I make this activity more fun? But noticing that like when you're avoiding something, you're avoiding actually feeling something that goes along with that thing as
Yeah.
well.
And it's if someone has never been through that experience of untangling an insecurity, it's really amazing. Like when you really go through it, and like let's just use the me working out and me like not comfortable with who my body was and things like that, and diving into that. And like it's really fascinating once you uncover that. It's like you become really like not motivated. It's like, well, I really don't need to work out 3 hours a day. Like it's like it makes it where it's like you're very calm about it, and all that pressure that you built up, like saying, oh, I got to be working out, and like when you have that insecurity, it's there for a reason. Like for example, I had a piece of my body that would always say, I'm fat, I gotta be skinnier, then someone can love me. And that was happening in the back of my brain. I had no idea. But then
Mm-hmm.
once you uncover that and you say, hey, why does this exist, type of thing, and like why are you here, and you give that comfort, then it's like then it doesn't really matter. Like that you
Yeah.
feel like a pressure relieved off of you when that happens. So I always recommend to someone to tackle their insecurity. And yes, it's uncomfortable during the process, but it's always worth it. And because you'll feel a relief of all that pressure that you built up, and it just feels a
Yeah.
lot better.
Yeah, totally. I mean, just knowing like that's like questioning, figuring out all these ways that we're actually telling ourselves that something's wrong with us when, nothing's wrong with how you are built or your innate worthiness. It's like even if you never worked out a day in your life again, that's not going to change that you are just as lovable and worthy of all the things that you want. So starting to show yourself little by little, where it's like, oh my gosh, I have to go to the gym and work out 3 hours, and like starting to show yourself, okay, well, what's actually going to happen if you don't go to the gym and work out
Yeah.
for 3 hours, and start to show yourself little by little that like, okay, going to the gym, 1 hour is not going to make me any less lovable or worthy of you know, all the things, but like you can figure out that like going to the gym for you actually 1 hour or 30 minutes or whatever is going to, make you feel better physically. And that's the reason that you want to do it, not just so that are meeting that like, oh my gosh, somebody has to love me. And so I have to look this certain way. So that's where like slowing that down and really starting to notice that all those ways that like how am i actually thinking that something's wrong with me,
Yeah.
um and
Yeah.
starting to question it and then like find the evidence that what you were actually thinking isn't true at all.
Yeah. And I think everyone should question their stories that they tell themselves. Like, for example, I used
Yeah.
to tell myself as an entrepreneur that I'm a hustler. I got to work 14 hours a day. And then that is my story that I tell myself. And then eventually I was like, okay, but why? Like, why do I have to work 14 hours a day? And then it was like, well, it's like, I got to be successful. And it's like, why? It's like, oh, I got to prove everyone that I'm the best. It's like, oh, so you really care about being validated by others. It's like, oh, yes, then someone can love me. Then I can love myself. And then it was really
Mm-hmm.
about me loving myself and me having that disconnect between myself. But once I gave myself that love and starting to love myself, then it was like, I really don't have to work 14 hours a day. Like, it really doesn't matter that much. And once I realized that, then it was like, feeling so much better. But I think we should
Yeah.
all question our stories. Like either if that's once a month, once a week, once a year, like I think we should always question our stories and saying, okay, this is my story. I tell myself why. And then most of the time, it didn't come from you. I always say 99% of the time, it didn't come from you. It came from some random thing or some insecurity of that you're trying to fix and cope with. That's
Yeah.
99% of the time. So it's really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, 99% of the time it's like white supremacy and the patriarchy, but I mean, that's like pretty much. I mean, yeah, it's like we have been taught by society like that we have to be productive to be worthy. I mean, even like in school growing up, it's like getting the good grades, all of these things that we have to achieve. Where it's like, I mean, I always like, I'm starting from a young age with my kids, but I'm like, all I care about is like your effort. I do not care about the grade that comes home on the report card. It's just the effort. So starting, yeah, like questioning those stories and noticing them first of all, which is where I think can be the tricky bit. But I mean, yeah, like for working 14-hour days, it's like that the story that you were telling yourself is like, I have to do that to be successful. Where it's like, you can even start as simple as like, well, what does success look like for me? And then you
Yeah.
can start, that's like a really good, what is success, and just defining that for yourself. You can do that for any area. Like, what's success in my business? What's success as a parent? What's success as like an employee? Like, what does that look like for me? And then answering that question, you're going to get to some of those stories and those thoughts.
Mhm.
And then that's where you can really dig in to question those stories. Like, is working 14-hour days going to help me be successful? Well, what's successful look like anyway? And I mean, my belief is that like really pulling back from working so much and having that balance, or taking a nap or going for a walk or whatever, that's actually going to help you be more productive than like sitting down and grinding and like doing all of these things and
Yeah.
go, 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 go. And like
Yeah.
that's something that like I can tell you that, but you can, and that's where you can start to question for yourself. Okay, like, well, what feels
Mhm.
good to me, and start to take that on, and um little by little show yourself, okay, like this is what is actually like a good fit for me, because it's not going to be the same for everybody, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And I think like once everyone finds that balance, like I had that conversation with myself and saying, hey, it's going to take me a little bit longer to become successful if I'm not working 14 hours a day. Yes. And I was like, that's just okay. Like, and like, then I realized like, hey, like me being a millionaire isn't like my version of success. Like my version of success is just me being happy and me living the way I want. And I'm like, cool, awesome. And every insecurity I unentangle, it really makes it where I become a lot more relaxed as a person. Like every time I go through and untangle another thing, and then it's always like, okay, awesome. Like I can be a little bit more relaxed and more detached to like the physical realm, I guess I should say. But like I'm more like comfortable with who I am. I have more inner peace inside of me because I start to love more of who I am. And these people that are
Yeah.
working all the time, usually I have a lot of experience with a lot of entrepreneurs, and they work themselves until they burn out. And I guarantee most of that is caused by insecurity, where they have to like they probably working with as hard as I was because of the same thing of me, like saying, "Hey, I need in order for me to be loved, I need to be successful. In order for me to be successful, I have to work 14 hours a day." And then that's the
Yeah.
story they tell themselves. And so I think a lot of people go through that same thing, and it's important to just question it, saying, "Okay, I don't need to do this. Like this is not necessary." And I think that's a really important thing to start
Yeah.
questioning.
Questioning that, and like even what you said, like, oh, I need to work 14 hours a day, or I'll be more, I'll be sick. Like, what was it that you said? Like, I'll be more
Successful faster.
successful
Yeah.
faster. Where I'm like, okay, like, let's actually dig into that thought and see how, like, that thought right there could be like complete bullshit. Like,
Yeah.
actually, how is you working 7 hours a day? Like, we can find evidence and proof that that's actually going to make you be successful, like, way faster. than working the 14 hours
Yeah.
because you're going to rest more. You're going to go out and do more fun things. You're going
Mhm.
to, take a nap that like your unconscious could like give you the next best idea for your business. Like,
Yeah.
there's equal evidence for like all the stories we tell ourselves and the thoughts we have ourselves if we slow down and like, okay, let's actually explore the opposite of that and like try that on and see how that feels and like do these little mini experiments. That's what I always like to do
Mhm.
with my clients, where it's like,
Yeah.
we're just going to come up with this theory, this new story, and we're going to try it on and we're just going to do these little experiments. And like, I don't know, I think like thinking of it as an experiment is kind of fun and takes the pressure off a little bit where it's like, okay, we're just going to try this and see. We're just going to
Mhm.
get the feedback from like running this, like, okay, Victor, let's work 3 hours today and like see what happens,
Yeah.
and like try that on. And like, of course, like your nervous system might have a reaction from that. And that's where we can dig in and explore, okay, what's coming up for you when I say work only 3 hours a day? And then we can get those stories to come out.
Yeah, I totally get that. And then what would be your advice to someone in the starting stages of getting to know themselves and becoming more self-aware of their thoughts, more self-aware of their story? Um, how would you start that process for the audience that's listening to becoming more self-aware of their thoughts and stories they tell themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I've always, I started with the thought model from the life coach school, where it's literally like a model where you're starting to break down like a circumstance, a thought, a feeling, an action, a result, and seeing how it's all connected. Because I had always heard, oh, your thoughts create your results. And I was always like, what does that mean? And so like, this is like a formula where it's like circumstance, thought, action, feel, like you can kind of go down and you can plug in. But like, that was like a really good jumping spot for me to think about like your thoughts. Like just pick one out, like a circumstance. Like if you have a circumstance, like Victor, you weigh 160 pounds. I don't know,
Hmm.
the circumstance is a fact. So you have that. Or if it's like, I'm starting a new job on Monday, like that's the circumstance, that's a fact that and then you have a thought about that. You have a thought about the fact that you're starting that new job. And then that thought that you have, or it's like, oh my gosh, nobody's gonna like me, it's like my coworkers are gonna hate me. Like some thought you have about it, or your thought could be like, I'm gonna go in there and like kick ass on Monday. But that creates a feeling. And then from that feeling, you do a bunch of actions or don't do a bunch of actions and then a result. So like that was a really good start for me when like all of this was just, what does this even mean? To
Yeah.
break down that circumstance, thought, feeling, action, result, and play around with that a little bit, where it's like, okay, certain thoughts can create, like, you have that circumstance, and then you can see what thoughts come up, and then you can play around with them and change them and see how it feels in your body and like the feeling that comes from that. And you can kind of see how it's like all tied
Mhm.
together. And that for me was like a really good um like first dive into playing around with some of those things, like the feelings and the results.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's like a really good easy tool by Brooke Castillo of the Life Coach School. She's the one that did that.
Hmm.
Another really good one that I love is Byron Katie's The Work. I don't know if you
Hmm.
know of her, but like she's got a worksheet that's free and you can kind of play around again with some of these thoughts. And she's really good at having those turnarounds because it's like if you can just pinpoint one of the stories, one of the thoughts, that's where you can turn it literally around. Like we just did. I have to work 14 hours to be successful faster. Okay. Well, what's the opposite of that? And I don't have to work 14 hours to be successful. Or how is it more true that if I don't work 14 hours, I can be more successful. So it's like once you get that story, once you get that thought, just simply turning it around to the opposite of that and just sitting with it and exploring and
Hmm.
seeing, okay, like what comes up for me? Um, how could this be more true than the story that I've actually been telling myself? Because
Hmm.
it's like so fast. Again, it goes back to all of those, the societal stuff and how we shouldn't be feel or think a certain way. And like, so another example, one of my clients we were in a session, and she said, I got really upset and I was telling my mom about it. And she's just like, oh my gosh, like, you're so sensitive. And can you believe that? Like, she just said, I'm so sensitive. And I was just like, yeah, you are sensitive. What's the problem? And she was like,
Yeah.
wait. And I was like, yeah, that's one of the qualities about you that I think is amazing. You are sensitive. We need you to be sensitive. So there's so many stories that, like, oh, I shouldn't be sensitive, or I'm too sensitive, or I'm too that. And that's like another really good thing to catch yourself and like telling
Mhm.
yourself, I'm too this. Or like often as children, we've been told, oh, you're too this or that. And it's like, if you can like think back to things as a kid that you were told you're too this or too that, you can actually like explore how it's a superpower of yours. So
Mhm.
like that's what I did with that client in that session. I was just like, okay, we're just going to sit here and explore all the ways that like your sensitivity is like makes you who you are and what's amazing. So next time when your mom tells you you're too sensitive, you can be like, yeah, and it's not a bad thing. It's like amazing, you know?
Yeah. No, I love
It's
that.
like
That's a good way.
another really good thing to
Mhm.
catch is like when you're triggered. Like if somebody says something to you and you're triggered by it, it's a really good thing to catch. Like if somebody says something and you're like, ooh, and you're like, and it's like you're activated in some way. It's
Mhm.
like a very, very like immediate into that story that there's something wrong with you there. And it's
Yeah.
like that, it's like once you can like work on that, um, and sort of like building the belief around that, um, like that'll like at least point you into the right direction of like where you need to do the work, right?
Yeah.
um I'm like trying to think of an example, but like
Yeah.
can you think of something
Yeah.
that's like triggering to
Yeah.
you, like if I were to
Yeah.
say?
So I have a very bad trigger when it comes down to girls, when it comes down to insecurities, when it comes to women, and them rejecting me. And like it was a very big thing that I had to overcome.
Okay.
And then I realized that the trigger came from there was a voice inside of me with these thoughts basically saying like I would never want to be like with you and things like that. And eventually we had to have a conversation inside my own head saying like, hey, like let's be on the same team, like we're trapped here forever, like so it's might as well figure out. And I realized that we had the same insecurities of the way we looked, and then eventually we were able to start working together and have a good communication now. um
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
basically, it started out with like I realized that I have a very bad trigger when it comes down to girls rejecting me, and I even tackled the same memory. I had this memory of I don't know if my brain invented this. I don't know if it really happened. I have no idea. Me on a playground with three girls making fun of me. I have no idea if it existed. I don't know if my brain made it up. But anyway, that was the root cause memory I traced down to. And then I altered that memory with another person, Oz. He was
Yeah.
on the podcast. He talks about altering memories and how you can flip the memory upside down. You can change the color of the memory. You can change what happens. And instead, I did kind of similar to what you did, where the girls were making fun of me, and instead of like, and then I started dancing, and then they started laughing at me, and but instead I was the one causing the joke. So rather than them pointing at me and laughing and me being hurt by it, I was actually
Yeah.
saying, yeah, like I'm a funny guy. What can I say? Like type of thing.
Yeah.
So me like kind of like flipping it and making it where I'm a little bit better. So I tackled it in a few ways. So I altered the root cause memory. I also changed the conversation inside myself with that one character to make it where it's a more positive conversation now, to where she no longer makes fun of me. We're in a good coordination relationship. And then also when it comes down to like my relationship with girls in real life, I also had to talk to myself saying, hey, a girl can love me. And that was a
Yeah.
very, very big conversation I had to have with myself, because my brain before was like, a girl can't love me. And then like a girl could never love me. And then I had to like say, like, I was like, Victor, girls do love you. Like it's not like they can, it's like they do. And it's like I had to like convince myself that they did it, but it
Hmm.
was a very, very long process to convince myself of that. And then once
Yeah.
did it, and I was like, wow, this is crazy that a girl can love me and girls do love me. And it was a very, very big obstacle I had to design in my mind. But yes, it all started from that one trigger that evolved this whole process.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, and was there anything specifically they would say, like when you say girls rejected you? Like was there
Mhm.
something specific that they said that like triggered you or
It was more like ew, gross type of thing. That
that's what
hurt
they would
pretty
say to
bad.
you?
Yes, and
Girls would
there are a
say
lot of
ew gross?
yes. Unfortunately, yes.
Okay, well that's where you can just pause and be like, okay, I don't even want to surround myself with girls who say ew gross, you know? Like, that's where not for me.
Yeah, but that one hurt pretty bad. That one went right through my heart.
Yeah, well, so and
Yeah.
that's the thing, like, ew, gross. So, like, clearly, I don't know if they were like, if it was something you said and they were like, ew, gross, or if it was like in response to your looks, ew, gross. But it's like so that would be if it was something like, okay, I don't know if the thought for you was like, okay, these girls think I'm ugly or something. But like, that's
Mhm.
just like a very clear, like where it's like the work for you then is to show yourself all of the ways that you are in fact a very handsome man,
Yeah.
right? Like because the
Mhm.
more you can believe that, then all the girls in the world are going to say ew gross, and it's not going to affect you at all when you're like 100% on
Yeah.
I'm handsome. Like I don't know what your problem is, you know. Like
Yeah.
an example I give recently is when I've done a lot of work with a parenting coach and like on my parenting specifically, because that's once you become a parent, you are going to get all these triggers like every day. Right?
Yeah.
Like one of the things I never realized, or like one of the things I learned in that parenting course with the coach, is that like anytime you're triggered by something that your kids say or do is an unmet need you had as a child, which is just like another interesting fact to think about. But I've
Hmm.
done a lot of work around, like I'm a good mom and like I show up for my kids. And so it's like that's an identity that I have, that I'm a good mom, that's like unwaverable. So we
Mhm.
were recently on vacation and the kids were being very dangerous jumping off the side of the pool. And so I said, hey, if you continue to jump, it was like in a really shallow area next to some things where they were going to get hurt. If we continue to do this, we're going to have to get out. I was like, what's going to happen if you continue to do this? We're going to have to get out, right? So they kept doing it. And I was like, okay, we got to get out. We've got to like pack up our stuff. We got to go back to the room. And of course, they're like crying. And my 5-year-old's like, you're such a bad mom. You're
Mhm.
so terrible. You're such a bad mom. And I was just like, you know what? I just like looked at him so calm. I was like, you can tell me all day I'm a bad mom, and it is not going to convince me that I'm a bad mom. I'm protecting you, and this is what we need to do. And so you can tell me all day. It's not going to affect me. And like my kids always have this thing where Elliot said I was stupid. Elliot did this. And I'm like, hey, the problem isn't Elliot saying you're stupid. The problem is when you believe it. So, like, when you know that you are not stupid,
Mhm.
anybody can call you stupid and it's not going to affect you whatsoever. So, like,
Mhm.
let's work on the areas where it's like somebody says something, I'm super triggered. That means I believe them in some way. Like,
Yeah.
if I say, Victor, you're ugly,
Mhm.
if that like affects you in some way, like let's work on really building that belief that 100% you are not ugly. So like anybody who tells you that, you're just gonna be like, that's fine. Somebody else is gonna think I'm attractive. Like I don't need you, you know.
This is what I find so fascinating behind beliefs. So when it comes down to beliefs, like let's say someone that's super Republican or super Democrat, okay? The
Yeah.
people that are the strongest, like either right or left wing. By the way, I'm not political, so I'm not getting political. But regardless if they're left or right wing, crazy,
Yeah.
then they're actually the ones that are most insecure about their belief. They're so strong and gung ho, like trying to convince everyone that their belief is right. They need to get external validation that their belief is correct. So that way
Mm.
they have to reinforce their own belief because they don't believe it themselves. And so they have to project it out to everyone else. But if they are right or left wing, they don't have to try to convince anyone. They go, yeah, I'm left or right. Like, doesn't really matter. Like literally, if they actually had a strong belief in that belief, then they would just be
Yeah.
comfortable with it and they wouldn't be triggered by anything. But the fact that the most right or left wing are just trying to cover up their belief because they might not believe it themselves is so fascinating, because you would think that they would be the most gung-ho, like strong belief person, but there's some insecurity behind their belief that they're doing because they have to tell the world to get that external validation of that belief. So it's really
Yeah.
fascinating to me on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when you'll find like if you're coming from a place of power and like being in your own power and like believing in your own power, you're gonna like find that you don't need to justify anything.
Hmm.
Like that's how you know that like you're really in that place of power. So like if you find yourself like justifying something, it's like, "Ooh, I actually like I don't believe this so much myself yet," or I need to like really work on like getting that strength up a little bit in this area because I find myself just like justifying myself or justifying what I'm offering, where it's like if you really fully believe in it and like you'll be in your power, and it's like you don't need to justify it because people are either going to get it or they're not. And
Hmm.
like same thing if you're going for a job interview and you really know that you have the skills, like you're not going to need to justify yourself like 100% in the interview. It's just going to come across as you got this because you do.
Yeah, exactly. And then yeah, everything becomes just so much less of a trigger. And I have another
Hmm.
question for you, is how can one know or feel when they're truly happy or free?
Hmm. I mean, for me, I think it's like the stopping overthinking every single thing, you know,
Hmm.
that's what a big one for me. It's like when I like stopped overthinking so much like what I am saying, or like like filtering every single thing out, and just overthinking like, oh, am I going to offend somebody when I say this, or what's my mom going to think if I show up online like this, or it's like all that overthinking of just like how we're showing up. um for me, like that's when I know like the more I can just not think and just be, like
Hmm.
that's where I find I tend to be happiest and like feel that like free feeling.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
And
like it does come from like that self-awareness of knowing, like, and starting small. Like I
mhm,
always say, when you're trying to show up and like not overthink, you have to like start small, because it's a shock to your nervous system to start to show up in ways that are a little less filtered or a little more you. Or I've all it's like a lot of people who've been raised in a really conservative or religious family, for example, and like now they're starting to show up in a different way that might be viewed a certain way from their like friends or family. And so like starting small in that, and soothing yourself like through it, just like little steps, little baby tiny steps,
yeah.
um to where you like put yourself out there a little bit more, slowly, and then like build that foundation to more and more show up in that way. But yeah, like not overthinking is for me was the biggest thing.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the overthinking comes from the emotional cause of everything comes down to either love or fear. And I think a lot of that fear of it was the reason why we overthink, kind of going down to insecurities. Like, for example, the like when we're overthinking, like thinking like, oh, what if I mess up? Like if you have a big speech or big presentation, you're thinking like, oh, what if I mess up? What if I do this? What if I do that? The underlying cause is fear. Like fear is one of the strongest emotions that we have, and we're fearful of something, and that's the
Mm-hmm.
reasoning of our
Yeah.
overthinking is because of that fear. Or if we're in love with someone, we're going to be always overthinking about love, like saying, oh my gosh, I love this person, I can't stop thinking about them. So I think like a lot of it comes down to that love or fear aspect,
Mm.
because that's what I think what causes most of our overthinking.
Yeah. I mean, in all the fears, it's like, yeah, getting down to like what exactly am I afraid of here? And really sort of like showing yourself that like the worst thing that I think can happen, even if that thing happens, I'm still gonna like be proud of myself or love myself anyway.
Yeah.
I told you right before we started recording this, I was like, I'm probably gonna forget everything and I'm not gonna like know what I'm talking about. And my brain's just gonna like, which it happened at the beginning, at the beginning,
Uh-huh.
like when I got on here and I was like, I've never recorded something live. I'm nervous. Like, I don't know what I'm talking about. And I was like fumbly, right? And I've calmed down as we've been going.
Mhm.
But it's like, okay, even if I get on here and I fumble and I forget every single thing I say, I'm still going to be proud of myself for showing up and having this conversation, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like thinking through those things and catching those fears and showing myself, okay, like even if that worst thing does happen, which most of the time it's not going to, but even
Mhm.
if it does, like how am I going to handle that? And
Mhm.
like kind of getting clearer. It's like, what support can I give myself, even if that thing happens?
Mhm.
Who can I ask to be in my corner? Like, if I get off this call and it went horribly, like, what do I need? Like, what am I going to give myself? Who am I going to like talk about? Who am I going to call and laugh about it with? Like those kinds of things that, like, it's like basically, I think a big confidence thing is like when you can have your own back, like,
Yeah.
no matter what happens,
And I
and
think
just
it's
be proud
important
of
to
yourself.
yeah, exactly. And I think the opposite of humility is pride. So I think a lot of us like become prideful and protective over certain things. And like for example, let's say I'm super proud of being the best public speaker to ever exist. Okay, I'm super proudful of that. And then
Mhm.
all of a sudden I mess up. I mess up one word, okay? And then I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I choke. And then I, like everything, like I'm just sitting there in the audience. And then like everything's horrible. But if I
Yeah.
had humility and I didn't identify with that and I choked, honestly, I would probably not even care about it. And if I did, I would just make a joke about it. Like, and that would
Yeah.
be like the thing I would do. And I've had this like mentality of like, let's say if the worst situation in the world would happen, like I am literally naked running through the airport, and that would be the worst situation in my life. Okay. And like in reality, people are probably they're gonna talk about it for maybe 5 minutes, maybe, and then they're gonna go on and do their normal life and complete. Most likely, it'll be in the back of their brain a little bit, but most likely they're gonna
Yeah.
forget about it 5 minutes later and move on with their life. And
Yeah.
we get trapped in this bubble where we get this story where it's like we think like that's our whole world. Like if something embarrassing happened to us, that the whole world is going to think about it. They're always going to be thinking about it, and then that's it. But in reality, people just move on after even less than 5 minutes. Usually people move on and they go through with their life. So when it comes down to like posting content, I used to always try to make it perfect. I used to try to do everything like that. But then I realized like, hey, like if I mess up, awesome. I have a cool story to tell in the future about me messing up. I'm like, awesome,
Yeah.
let's go and do this. And like I always have that mentality and I always say like even if I go on the stage and like absolutely choke it out, think how awesome this story will be in the future. And I always have that mentality and it makes it where I'm always down to mess up. Like I'm not failing, I'm not doing successful.
Yeah.
So that's my
Yeah. And I
mentality there.
think like I think really tuning into like a good question is just like how can I be more honest about,
Hmm.
like, I think that's such a important thing for us to all strive, like, yeah, I mean in terms of thinking about like a happy life. I think the more honest and real we can be just about like where we are, instead of having to kind of put that mask up of, oh, I have to be this certain way or whatever. It's like really like just showing up in your complete like humanity.
Yeah.
And being honest, it's like I can sit here and like say, oh yeah, I was super nervous when we very first started this call. And like
Mhm.
that to me, it's like that's great because it's like I'm showing that I can get on here and even though I'm nervous, I can still do it. And I can be honest about being nervous. It's a very normal human emotion,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You can be honest. So it's like it's another way to just like tap into like, well, what are some of the ways I'm not being honest and why in my
Mhm.
life? You know, is it, and that can like kind of bring up some of those insecurities too that you can work on. Is just like tap into that. It's like, am I on this date and I'm telling this girl that I like make multiple six figures when like really I don't? Like, what's up with that? Like, why am I doing that? Like, catch yourself in all these little ways because it's like so freeing when you can actually just be honest about where you are. And it gives other people permission to just be honest about where they are and show up as who they are as well. So I
Mhm.
think that's like a really big freeing thing to tap
And I
into.
And I think a lot of us lie to ourselves about the emotions that we're feeling all the time. Like as a guy, like when we grow up, it's saying, "Oh, big boys don't cry." Like we're not like don't feel pain and things like that.
Yeah.
And when we do feel pain or do cry or do feel sad or things like that, we lie to ourselves saying, "I'm not sad. Like I'm a man. Like I don't get sad." Like and we go through these like emotional things and we're not emotionally honest with ourselves. We're literally like lying to ourselves saying, "I'm not sad. I'm not sad." And we try to like cover it up and cope with
Yeah.
it. But in reality, like we're sad. We're just like literally just trying to hide it and suppress it as much as we humanly can. And
Yeah.
I think it's really important just to be honest with ourselves and saying, "Hey, I'm sad. This is a normal human emotion. It's okay to be sad." And having
Yeah.
that conversation with yourself and being honest with yourself rather than lying to yourself and like going through
Yeah.
that. It's totally normal to feel emotions. And if you think you're feeling emotion,
Yeah.
you probably are.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
it's
and
really
some
important.
people, right, like that is like a skill to like I was saying at the beginning, like a lot some people just don't actually know what they're feeling. Like it's like they've suppressed it for so long, it's like numb and they don't really know how to tap into that. But yeah, it's like once you get better at that and like tapping into like, okay, what I actually am feeling is sad. And then the more like you can actually just allow that, like I'm sad. What do I need to do right now? Like I need to lay on my bed and cry. I need to whatever, like you could just allow yourself to be sad and not like push it away, not shame it. It's like you're actually going to get through that
No.
way faster than if you just try to like keep yourself busy and like repress it and do everything else other than just like, let me just be sad. Let me just lay here and read this book or, watch a
Yeah.
really sad movie and get it out, whatever needs to happen. Um, for
And
sure. Oh,
and
yeah.
I want to go through that repression only works short term. So it might feel good, like for example, to repress the sadness immediately as it comes up through alcohol, drugs, or just literally repressing it in your mind. And
Yeah.
but the thing is, it always comes up when you repress something. It works in a silo in the brain, and it comes up in really weird ways. And it makes it where no matter like what happens, like it's going to somehow resurface itself in weird ways, and it's going to impact you so far long term until you readdress it. And people live their entire lives doing that, and they get really messed up and do really weird things where like
Yeah.
for example, let's say every time you suppress your sadness and every time someone hurts you, you just suppress it and you don't feel the pain. You most likely you're going to have if you're a guy, you're going to have a really big ego about yourself. You're going to always try to be better than everyone else. So no matter where you are, everyone sees you as a higher being rather than seeing yourself as a lower being. And when someone makes fun of you though and critiques you, you get super
Yeah.
upset. You get super triggered because you're like, "Oh my gosh, oh my I have to have a better identity." And it's just like that's just one example of a really weird way that a normal repression can equals a really weird identity, which makes it
Yeah.
you do really weird things. So yeah,
Mhm,
which
mhm.
happens to a lot of guys. Like most guys go through that. I want to say most guys have that.
Totally, totally. From all the societal stuff. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
And
Yeah.
I have a question for you. This is a pretty deep question. Does
Uh-oh.
freedom and happiness have to coexist, or can one exist without another? In a either like in a negative or positive way, meaning that can freedom and happiness be always have to coexist together to be happy, or can they live in isolation? Or is that happen in a negative way?
Yeah, I mean, this goes like right like with what we're just talking about, right? I mean, it's like, yeah, I mean, no, they don't have to go together because you're not going to be happy all the time. And
Hmm.
honestly, I'm always very clear about this, like with people, because I think it's so important to like raise that self-awareness. It's
Hmm.
like you're getting to know yourself on a deeper level is not always an easy thing. It's not
Hmm.
always like sunshine and rainbows and happiness. Like you feel more free, but that doesn't always make it easier either. Like
Yeah.
you aren't filtering yourself as much, but that means you're going to step into having some more difficult conversations and setting more difficult boundaries with your family
Mhm.
members or friends and things like that. Or it's going to
Yeah.
like you're going to show up more authentically and you're going to lose relationships,
Mhm.
you're going to like see some of the people that you thought really knew you and understood you like actually choose to kind of pull back a little bit. So it's like
Mhm.
the more free that you are to show up as your authentic self and less filter does not always necessarily mean it's just going to be like super easy and
Mhm.
happy all the time. I think like on the other side, once you continue to build that belief and like get more comfortable with some of those things that are like natural occurrences that aren't necessarily fun or easy,
Yeah.
like I think then like because when you do lose those relationships, you're filling them with, you're attracting, right, the ones that actually are more in tune with you and understand you for who you actually are. So it's like it comes with the good and bad, but it's like it's definitely like an up and down road. I would
Yeah.
say, it's not in like that's going back to that humanity piece, it's like you don't just knowing that it's fine to like not be happy all the time and that's actually just quite normal.
Mhm.
Um in itself is really freeing,
Yeah.
to just know that it's normal and what you are feeling in this moment is totally valid and totally normal. Like that, in a way, it's like it's freeing and you'll get to the happiness, I think, like through
Yeah.
feeling all of the things and like fully accepting your humanity, but it does not mean it's easy.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah, and I have one last question before we sign off. Is what would be your one action item, your one takeaway for the audience when it comes down to being happy? Everything we
Hmm.
talked about would be their one takeaway that you can leave them with.
Being happy. I mean, I think it really goes down to defining everything for yourself.
Yeah.
So like really start like we were talking about, like really start to define what does happiness look like for me. Define what is success for me. Define all of these things. What is being a good mom? What is being, like anything that you can pinpoint in your life, like start to define like what is this that I actually think for myself. And because that's where you're going to get really clear on like once you know those things and define those things, that's when like whatever anybody else thinks like doesn't matter.
Yeah.
When you can get really clear on that and work on defining it and building the belief, of those things, that's where you'll be really free and really stable and happy and like less triggered all the time on those things and less like another really like fun thing that I've been doing lately, once you it just like came to me because I've been reading Harry Potter with my kids, um,
Uh-huh.
and watching the movies. But like I've been visualizing like the stories we tell ourselves, the negative things, and like, oh, you're not good enough, you're not worthy, you're whatever.
The
I've
shadows.
been like I've been like visualizing them as the oh shoot, now I'm gonna forget the name. You know what I'm talking about? Like
Yeah,
the
the shadow things, the dark cloud. Majigers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man, what's their name? What's the name? We just watched this movie and read this book, and I can't remember the name. But anyways, they're like coming to suck your soul, right? Like
Yeah.
they're like reaping on you. And I've been imagining, like, I even in bed at night, I've been like laying there and I've been like relaxing. And I just like imagine myself with the wand, and I'm like I'm like doing the Patronus or whatever, you know what I'm talking about? Like
Yeah, I
conjuring
know
up
what
the
you're talking
Patronus. And
about.
it's like all those negative thoughts are just like, they can't enter the bubble of light. They're just like, and it's like so relaxing. And like, I just love doing it. I'm like, because like you got to start to notice that like what you're telling yourself, it like hurts, man. It like really hurts. Like
Yeah.
if I were to sit here and like say all the stuff that you tell yourself, like you just be like, dang, Angie, like, like, come on, like it, but you do it to yourself all the time, you know, like, and so once you can start to notice that like that hurts and like conjure up this like, I'm not letting it in today, I'm just like pushing it away. um but yeah, like starting to notice them and get yourself a little Patronus. I'm probably even saying it wrong to any Harry Potter fans out there, like, oops. Anyways.
Well, awesome. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. I know we can go on this for 7 more hours. Angie, please tell the audience how to find you and how to find more about what you do.
Yeah. Well, my website's angiecazares.com. Pretty active on Instagram at coach.angie.cazares. And yeah, those are like the main ways to reach out to me. You can find my email and everything on my website and learn more about my services. So,
Amazing. Angie, thank you so much for joining today. I wanted to thank all our viewers for engaging with us on our live sessions here at the Mind Workshop Podcast. Great news, guys. The Mind Workshop Podcast will be on Spotify and Apple Podcasts in September. You'll be able to tune on to all your favorite episodes on the go. Again, we are live Wednesdays and Thursdays from 12 to 3 Central Time, and it's all made possible by Cross Skills VAs. Super grateful for them. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Angie, thank you so much for joining today. Been a
yeah,
great
thanks so much.
conversation.